Hello, everybody, and Arundhathi, a very warm welcome to you, to the festival, and to Sri Lanka. We are going to dive into two of your works today. So, the Gallery of Upside Down Women, your collection of poetry about women who really push the envelope, and your anthology, Wild Women, which brings together the poetry of women mystics. So this is sacred poetry, but again, sacred poetry that pushes the boundaries, that makes us, think of the relationship with the divine in a very different way. So I'm going to start off by asking you to say something about the bhakti tradition, which you do write about, and the well-known poets from that tradition, such as Mirabai and Akka Mahadevi. And, historically, the bhakti movement was a massive social shift. So could you tell us a bit also about what made someone like Mirabai so radical? And what did it actually mean for a woman like her, of her status, to walk away from everything she had and take to the streets in the way that she did?
Thank you, Sukanya, and thank you all for being here. That's much better. Thank you. I want to say something. It's very difficult to talk about Bhakti, Sukanya, and it's very difficult to zero in on one woman in particular and what her choices meant, without in some way implicating an entire tradition. So I want to start by just this, to say this about your question about Bhakti, that much of my work has really been about reframing Bhakti. I grew up surrounded, like so many of us in this subcontinent, with Bhakti poetry. I watched it performed in dance, I heard it in performance by wonderful musicians, but my idea of Bhakti was largely servitude. Devotional poetry, it seemed to me, was largely about becoming a servile puddle at the feet of some notion of the divine. And I found myself, as I grew up, very uncomfortable with that idea, because it seemed to involve such an absence of spine. And so my journey continued through life. My own life journey perhaps led me to a point when I was tripped up, derailed. And it was after that derailment that I began to see these Bhakti poets afresh. And I began to see them much less as subordinate, much less as passive, and much more as mystic poets deeply in quest of the self, and who, even when they address the divine, have a passionate, argumentative, erotic, spirited relationship with the divine. And that's when I realized how wrong I was in having reduced Bhakti to just this kind of lily-livered, sentimental poetry. And because you asked about Mirabai, I need to say something about my interest in women mystic poets. I've been fortunate to be able to write about many of the subjects that have interested me, whether it was a book on the Buddha, whether it is a book on a contemporary yogi, Satguru, whether it is an anthology of Bhakti poetry. But a question that intensified for me over the past decade has been, where are the women? Where are the women? And I realized that in my book, Eating God, which was the book of Bhakti poetry, I have a handful of women, and these are the women you mentioned. There's Mirabai, who's the legendary 15th and 16th century mystic of Rajasthan. In the southern part of India, we know of Andal. We know of Akka Mahadevi. In Kashmir, some of us know of Lal Ded. But even these women, it seemed to me, have been flattened into calendar art. We see them as swooning disciples. We see them as women in states of easy surrender to some unattainable Godhead whom we don't know very much about. They don't seem to be women with bodies. They don't seem to be women with bewilderments, with hormones, with questions, none of that. And so much of my work then was about reclaiming these voices and learning to listen to the poems afresh. And that's when I discovered that the very same Meera whom you speak of, the very same Meera whom we know of as this great devotee of Krishna, we often associate her with very pretty, somewhat treacly music, unfortunately. Lyrical, but sometimes it seems to be easy lyricism. And yet when you go back to the poems are full of surprises. So there is a poem by Meera in which she says to this little bird, she says, "I'll tear off your wings, I'll rub salt in your beak if you don't bring my Krishna to me now." There's that kind of ferocity of longing that I was completely unprepared for. There is Akka Mahadevi, who's a 12th century South Indian woman mystic, whom we are told walked naked. She not merely left her home and family, she stripped off all clothing and walked the countryside of the South naked. What that kind of decision might have meant for a woman in the 12th century is something that just boggles the mind, because we don't even know what it means today to make a choice like that. And here's Akka Mahadevi, not just a supine figure at the feet of her Shiva. Instead, here's this Akka Mahadevi who tells us, take these husbands who die, decay, and feed them to your kitchen fires. Give me the imperishable one. Why had I never heard of Akka Mahadevi? Why did I never know that the same Akka Mahadevi was capable of a question like this? Why did I never know of the 14th century Dalit woman mystic, Soirabai, who says, if menstrual blood makes me impure, tell me who wasn't born of that blood? Why did I never hear of her growing up? It just seemed to me that I had missed out on an entire unexplored subcontinent of sacred poetry. Unexplored. And this should have been the stuff of textbooks at school. I should have known of the 17th century Kashmiri woman poet, and I never knew of her until just a few years ago. A 17th century Kashmiri woman mystic, Roop Bhavani, who says, I have not bowed, I never will. The one who listens stands resplendent within me. That is worship. That is what I do. The same Roop Bhavani says, how will you recognize an enlightened woman? Will she have her head tonsured? Will she be wearing ochre? And her response to that is, the ever-conscious plays and dances just as others do. She decks herself, good clothes she wears. On the path of Shiva, she becomes Shiva himself. No longer about bowing and scraping before the divine. This is a woman who will settle for nothing less than embodying the divine. To me, it is a great, great tragedy that I grew up unaware of these women. So much of my work has really been about reclaiming a sisterhood that I feel deprived of.
Yes, absolutely. I think I was at times quite taken aback and shocked by some of the poems in Wild Women, and they were like, I had, like many of us, I grew up with Mirabai bhajans, but this is not that. This is far more earthy,
Far more dangerous.
Dangerous,
yes.
also really pushing the boundaries.
I
The
must give you a whiff. May I give you a whiff of a little more danger? May I? So this is a 13th century woman mystic called Janabai from Maharashtra. Janabai was a maid servant in the home of a celebrated mystic poet, Namdev. She's a maid servant of the 13th century. And yet her relationship with the divine is one of such backslapping familiarity that there is no notion of hierarchy anymore between her and Vitthala, her god. So she has one dangerous poem in which she says, God, my darling, do me a favor and kill my mother-in-law. I will be glad when she is gone, but you will be a good God, won't you? And kill my father-in-law. I will be lonely when he is gone, but you will be a good God, won't you? And kill my sister-in-law. I will be free when she is gone. I'll pick up my begging bowl and be on my way. And then it's just the two of us, you and I. It's just women of temerity, women of gumption. And it just feels to me that it is just such a shame that many of us grew up looking for voices of freedom largely from Western exemplars, rather than the very voices that we have here within our traditional systems as well.
So, Arundhati, I have a question about, we are always taught that you keep the physical and the spiritual separate, right? So these poems are completely different. They they go in the opposite way. So how do you think these poems by these mystics, how do they challenge us to rethink the body and the link between what is sacred and what is profane?
Whether you're a male mystic or a female mystic, whether you're a male seeker or a female seeker, life is hard. Life is not easy. But what strikes me about the women mystics in particular is the fact that their poems seem to remind us again and again of precisely what you say, the fact that the body is not an impediment on the spiritual journey. You don't have to wish away the body, you don't have to deny the body, you don't have to amputate the body, you don't have to bypass the body. The body becomes instead an instrument of the sacred. And there are so many examples of this, Sukanya. If you read as many of you here will be familiar, there is the Buddhist canon, the Therigatha, which is an extraordinary anthology of women in the Buddhist tradition, the nuns at the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago. You have Punnika, the little girl, the slave girl, who stops a Brahmin on his way to the river and says, be careful, Brahmin, you may wash away your demerits, but what if you wash away your merits as well? What will you be left with? And we are told that this question emanated from Punnika like a lion's roar, because it came from a woman so completely aligned between body and mind and breath, that when this little girl, not a woman, when this little girl poses the question, which you may say is just a commonsensical question, but the question posed at the right moment by the right person with a voice that comes from deep within her, transformed this ritualistic Brahmin. And it's a little poem in the Therigatha. And there are so many others. There's Amrapali, the courtesan, again, the great Buddhist courtesan. And we have a poem in the Therigatha by Amrapali at the end of her life as a nun, looking down at her naked body, her aging body, looking down at it and saying, yes, it's true, the Buddha is right, the truth speaker doesn't lie, the body decays, the body ages. And yet, if you tune into that poem again, you realize it's not just about decay and perishability. it is also about pride. Pride at what this body is capable of being. You have a 12th century mystic whom I love, Sule Sankava from Karnataka. Sule Sankava is an ecstatic devotee in love with Shiva. She's also a prostitute. And in her poem, she says, "The men around me are unsurprising. I give them what they want, they give me what I want." It's a very clear transactional relationship. But she says, "My God is different." And she gives us a beautiful definition of this God. She calls him Nirlajeshwara, the shameless God. This is a prostitute telling us that my God is the God whom I can invite into every crevice of my consciousness without guilt, without shame. This is not a God you have to purify yourself to reach. This is a God who will get his hands grimy trying to reach you. That's what these women bring into the poems. The idea that flesh and spirit are not necessarily at war with each other. In fact, flesh can become the way, the means by which we understand spirit.
Okay, now thank you for that, Arundhati. I'm going to move to asking a slightly different question. You know, you've referred to the age of the megaphone, right? You know, in today's political climate, especially where you and I are from, we often see religion, it's used in a very narrow patriarchal sense. It's pushed, you know, Ram Rajya, etc. But then there are the traditions, different traditions, such as Bengal, where I come from, where it's the worship of the Devi, the goddess, in her many forms. You know, we only ever look at her, whether it's Durga, whether it is Saraswati, whether it's Kali, it's different forms of the goddess. So do you think that this diverse way of looking at the divine is actually also a form of, you know, quiet, gentle resistance?
And sometimes not so quiet at all.
Yeah, not
right?
so quiet.
Nothing
yeah,
quiet about Kali. I think what's interesting to me is that even when these women mystic poets invoke a male god, there are many, when you think of Kanopatra, you think of even Janabai, whom I mentioned earlier, many of them will speak of their male god as the mother. Not just Vitthala, Krishna, which is a name for Krishna, but Vittai, the mother. Which is really, to me, a reminder that the goddess traditions can never be stamped out. They find a way of reinventing themselves all the time. So, yes, Bengal and the goddess, undeniably, and there is some magnificent poetry that comes from the male mystic poets of Bengal, you know, Ram Prasad Sen, Kamalakanta Bhattacharya, Nazrul Islam, many. But there are also women's voices in praise of the goddess, which I wanted to include in the third section of Wild Women for a very real reason. I wanted to be reminded of the fact that there are women who feel the need deeply to invoke the goddess. So there is the Garba, a traditional form of Gujarat, in which the goddess is invoked by these dancing women in a circle who let off steam with their mother. And they're basically complaining to her about how dreadful life can be. Or you have the tantrikas who acknowledge the body deeply and see the body as the springboard for change. I wanted all those voices in there. There is also a contemporary Sri Lankan poet in that section. She speaks, and I wanted her to speak, of Western goddesses. She speaks of Demeter and Persephone, and these are for her living presences as she invokes them.
Okay, Arundhati, I'd like you now to give the audience a taste of your poetry from the gallery of Upside Down Women. So may I invite you to read? We have time.
I'm always concerned about time, so I'm going to be keeping an eye out. Maybe 2 poems. I will not do more, and I'd be very happy to hear from the audience as well if there are questions or if there are comments that you'd like to share. I'm going to read you, since I mentioned Sule Sankava, that wonderful 12th century sex worker poet, I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote on her, which is what this entire book is, much of this book is about. It's allowing myself the license to speak through the voices of some of these women, their dramatic monologues. So this is Sule Sankava telling us about her God, but she also, in this dramatic monologue, mentions many other women mystics. You don't have to know their names. I mention them because I like naming, and because naming is such an important way of honoring, and these women have just not been honored for far too long. God's forgotten nickname. It's a playful poem, it's a fun poem. Nothing solemn about it, I assure you. God's forgotten nickname. Who says harlots don't have choices? We can't choose our clients, and believe me, I've seen them all. Fried, boiled, scrambled, poached, sunny side up, runny side down. But we can choose our gods. I chose mine because he came without a name, and on some nights, without a body. I chose mine because he waited his turn, didn't ask me to hurry or clean up, didn't complain about the line of shuffling men at my door. When colleagues badger me for details, I turn sassy. I say, Mahadevi's God unhoused her, Janas deloused her, Andals aroused her, Avvayars doused her. Some like them fried, others like them boiled, some like them immaculate. I like my gods soiled. But they aren't impressed. He must have a USP, they claim, a sun sign, an address, for God's sake, a name. I grow quiet. He has a garland of fancy titles, I say, but they don't quite work for me. Perhaps he is the world's greatest lover. But how does that matter when planets shrivel and char in the flaming cemetery of his gaze? And maybe he birthed the three worlds beneath the delirious hurricane of his feet. But how does that count if he's too bloody innocent to read the lurch and plummet of a contrarian heart, the fine print of my breath? And yet, he is mine, friends, for a simple reason. For he rushes to my side when I utter his darkest, most intimate, most forgotten nickname, the one coveted by every God there is, my God, without shame. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for one more, Arundhati, before
I thought of two poems, but I have a
Yeah.
feeling we're going to run out of time.
No, I think we're still okay.
There's a request about a poem about chai, which is something I think we will all be repairing to. We're all going off to have chai very shortly. So here's a chai poem for Sukanya and for all of you, and it's not a long one, and it's a fun one, but I will also say it is addressed to women, but if you're not a woman and you enjoy your chai, this poem is for you too. When two women drink chai together. All's well in the world when two women drink chai together. Time holds its breath, star anise glitters, ginger gives up the ghost, lemongrass grows rogue. Cinnamon is less sinned against than sinning. Bodhidharma awakens when two women drink chai together. Aeolian harps trill, kettle drums roll, mind meets heart, part becomes whole. Apothecaries smile and sommeliers sing. Lao Tzu intones the Tao Te Ching. Nilgiri meets Darjeeling when two women drink chai together. Froth of jade, jewel dew, ancient cauldron, friendship brew. One's a hermit, ten's a jamboree. The perfect number is always 3.
a cackling duo, and a pot of tea. Two women drinking chai together. There will be time to love our men, but not when caffeine meets estrogen. The defense budget and the state of AI must stand aside as earth meets sky. Ours is not to question why teaspoons tango and hippos fly when two women drink chai together. There will be a time when both man and beast are included in our cosmic feast. And one day it won't be out of line to quaff a martini or a bottle of wine. But right now, friend, it's been too long. Ooh long, ooh long, ooh bloody long, since two women drank chai together.
Thank you, Arundhati, very much.